everyone, and welcome to Echo HBV Workshop. Nice to see you all again. I'm your facilitator, Rachel, with DKB Med. Hi, Dr. Coffin. How are you today?
Hi, good morning, good afternoon. Thank you. Yes, I'm doing well. How are you?
Great, thanks. Hi, Dr. Pan. How are you?
Hi, how are you?
Good, thanks. Thanks for joining us. And happy to see so many faces and names back. So hi, Dr. Nunez, Dr. Moy, Leslie, Shannon, Shantae, Linda, Marissa. I know we've got some folks trickling in. So this is our third module. So we will be concluding next time. So as always, we have a couple pre-test questions for you. You'll again see these again at the end. So why don't we go to that? So we've got plenty of time for questions and answers. And just always as a reminder, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. We'll read those aloud. But also feel free when it's time for it, you can take yourself off mute, and we encourage everyone to put their cameras on if they can. And you could ask the question to our faculty. And then we'll move over to a patient case. And as I said, we have one last week with all of you. So if you have a patient that you'd like to, or a patient case you'd like to share next time, please let us know. All right, so why don't we go into our polls? Okay, so for patients with hepatitis B requiring treatment, I initiate treatment with Defivir. Would you say always, often, sometimes, rarely, or never? And then the other question is, which of the following therapies has the highest rate of drug resistance? Tenofovir disoproxil, tenofovir elafenamide, entecavir, or lamivudine? Give everyone a chance to answer those questions. And while we do that, Dr. Pan or Dr. Coffin, who will be presenting the slides today?
I will volunteer since the
Okay.
last time module 2, Dr. Calvin presented. So
Okay.
I just want to clarify the question 2. I think it's a little bit tricky if you ask which of the following therapy has the highest rate of drug resistance. I interpret it as a highest rate of developing drug resistance. So
Okay.
because if you just try to interpret what is written here, drug resistant, do it means you have a higher barrier or higher chance of develop that kind of things? I think it needs to be clarified.
Thank you for that clarification. And we'll clarify that again in the post-test.
Right.
Okay, let's end our poll. And all right.
Okay, so I guess we have like 50 minutes to go through the slide deck. So today we are moving on the treatment module. So at the end of this presentation or discussion, you should be able to evaluate your patients in using appropriate medical treatment for chronic hepatitis B. Now, let's take a look at the choice of hepatitis B therapy. In general, you have two kind of choice. Either two kind of choices. Either you take oral antiviral treatment, or you could get the immune modulator. That's the injectable pegylated interferon, or the old version is interferon alpha, which is require every other day injection. But the most recent version is a second generation with a pegylated you use once a week. So injectable versus the oral antiviral treatment. Now, here lists all the oral antiviral treatment choice here. For patients may have issues during the treatment, you have your pretext asking for resistant issues. So we have like 5 antiviral in the market, in the US market, or globally you should be available, they should be available globally. Lamivudine, tobevudine, and entecavir on the left, the top 3, they are nucleosides, and the defivir is nucleotide. It's different category of medication, but for first line treatment is entecavir or tenofovir DF or tenofovir alafenamide, TAF or TDF. So when patients are using second-line treatment, they might have drug resistant, or if a patient uses a first-line treatment of entecavir, it's a very small chance they got resistant. So here is show you the management strategy of any suboptimal or drug-resistant situations. You should switch the second line to the first line, only switch to DDF or TAF, not switching the second line to entecavir, because particularly we mentioned nucleoside, namivudine or talpivudine. If they got resistant, chances are they will have a cross resistant with entecavir. So single message, any suboptimal response or resistant to previous antiviral treatment, you should consider TDF or TAF. That might be the best way to handle the situation. Now, you may want to know which patient we should choose oral antiviral, which one might be good for interferon. Here shows the pros and cons of two approaches. The interferon treatment, of course, is a fitline treatment. Usually you treat it for 1 year, and then you stop the therapy. But the inconvenience of injection, some side effect like thrombocytopenia, or patients may develop depression, that actually make interferon injectable, at least in the United States, not that much popular. Most patients would treat it with oral antibiotic, but the oral antiviral treatment will require long-term treatment. Some first line, like entecavir, may have resistance. Second-line treatment, higher chance to develop resistance. Here shows the efficacy difference. Pegylated interferon, if you choose the right patient. I don't want to get into too deep into the genome type. For certain virological response, like E antigen conversion or even S loss, interferon in a favorable genotype, like genotype A and B, probably will get you a better handle on that. Oral antiviral treatment, in contrast, they probably have to take about 5 years to achieve that 1 year result when patients receive pegylated interferon. Now, for co-infection cases, usually interferon might be a better choice. For example, now if you have the Delta co-infection, or in the old days, HCV and HBV, but now HCV is all pan-genotypic, one pill, 8 weeks treatment in most patients. So it's not the issue of choosing interferon for co-infected HCV and HBV. I believe they should all receive any HCV or even co-infection should get the oral treatment. Now, why some patients on TDF, it may not be a good idea. So we talk about the resistant entecavir for second-line resistant is not a choice. But if you have a treatment-naive patient, you do have 3 effective treatment, first-line treatment, entecavir, TDF, and TAF. The only major difference among these 3 are safety profiles. So TDF have a renal issue, bone issues. If you use long-term, and showed it here, it may have decreased patients' bone mineral density, what may cause renal function decline on TDF. So therefore, patient here lists up here, older patients, bone disease, risk for renal problems, should consider entecavir and TAF. How to monitor patients during therapy? Now, currently recommend that virological features or markers you should monitor every 3 months during the treatment until the patient stabilize or convert. Like E antigen conversion, you may want to check it to 6 months or even once a year. Any patients with viremic, I routinely monitor it 3 months because you want to monitor the compliance too. Now, all first-line treatment, you should monitor renal function. Even though we mentioned that entecavir or TAF, they may not have a significant renal issue, but for example, entecavir, you do want to know if the patient have natural decline or other comorbidity decline, causing the decline of renal disease, and then you need to adjust the dose. For example, entecavir, if a patient GFR less than 50, you'll probably take it 5 days a week, something like that. Now, don't forget, Hep B is a risk factor, even without cirrhosis, for liver cancer. So HCC surveillance should be implemented in all patients, regardless whether they receive antiviral treatment or not, based on the risk of getting HCC, and you stratify them with whether they should get a routine renal sonogram, or in cirrhotic patients with nodules, you may want to give MRI or CAT scan as a surveillance. Now here is another issue that when we deal with treatment, some patients, they did not develop resistant, but they're suboptimal, usually defined by good compliance patients, but persistent viremia, even in first-line treatment after 1 year. But if you still use second eye, I thought that we should not use second eye. But let's say you inherit a patient, immigrant just show up in your office, have been on second eye for 6 months, then they still have viremia, we can declare that that's the suboptimal treatment. So second line is 6 months, first line is 1 year. After 1 year, they still have viremia, well, non-compliance. Now, suboptimal treatment actually is still a problem. You see overall, they increase the risk of cancer. There's a huge study done in Korea showing that particularly patients with cirrhotic or high level of fibrosis, if they have persistent viremia, even on treatment, they have a higher chance to develop HCC. So we need to hammer that. That's why I keep talking, doesn't matter resistant or suboptimal, you should consider switch to medications that may help you to solve the problem, or sometimes we need to do a combination treatment. And the next question is, presuming your patient is doing well, and your patient may ask you when I can stop. So I always encourage my peers or my fellows and look at patient's background. Here we don't have a lot of time to go through the detail, but the rule of thumb is for vertical transmitted patients like Asian patients, majority of Hep B patients in the US, they're Asian patients, over 50%. I don't recommend that you base on E antigen status conversion and then stop them for treatment. They probably should treat until they're S loss, that called clinical cure. Now, for horizontal transmitted, like non-Asian patients, most patients, non-Asian patients in the US, they probably get horizontal transmission, then E antigen conversion or E antigen loss might be a good indicator to stop the treatment. We again try to emphasize the HCC screening surveillance. Non-cirrhotic patients who have risk factor, such as family history, or they may have NAFLD or the other risk factors, they should have regular screening, even though they're not cirrhotic. But cirrhotic patients definitely lifelong screening until they get transplant. The cost effectiveness, well, screening methods, we usually use alpha-fetoprotein in combination of the imaging study, most common use sonogram, but at least, bottom line is at least you should offer sonogram. That's at least. Some providers may not want to use alpha-fetoprotein as a combination. Now here's the AASLD, but I encourage you to look at the most recent update from the American Cancer Association. They all have, or another is from the HCC hepatitis liver cancer screening. guideline. They do have different guidelines. This one is showing here very conservative. It's a minimum criteria, but I'm sure in the practice, not all your patients will fit in this criteria. You should screen those patients based on the risk. Bottom line is anybody over 40 with Hep B should get screened, female 50 here. Screening is optional for alpha-fetoprotein, but sonogram is a must. QID, well, are we still telling patients that you have to take the medication forever? Chances are not. Many robot pipeline therapies has been on phase 2, phase 3. Looking at clinical QID is very possible in the next couple of years. That means we can use effective therapy to convert patients' surface antigen from positive to negative, and therefore, with the hope of no more reactivation, you can stop the therapy. But I would estimate that the final QID, like hepatitis C, eradicating the cccDNA in the liver, probably take much longer than 5 years. But I would routinely tell my patients that the new therapy is evolving, and we are towards clinical QID very soon, and eventually we'll get rid of the HBV infection. So start treatment now. It's very meaningful to reduce the complication of cancer and cirrhosis. At least can get you enough time to receive your QID therapy. Otherwise, you will have a risk of dying from a complication now or pretty soon. So HBV functional QID is the idea of trying to get the patients off therapy with this new multi-targeted therapeutic aging. We now have different phases of clinical development. I just want to give you some ballpark idea where we are now. So most promising would be the silencing RNA agents and the CAM, the capsule assembly modulator. Those two probably will come up earlier. The immune modulators now is not showing very high efficacy, but it's necessary in a combination of activating immune clearance. So on the left would be those new agents suppress HBV replication in different life cycle stage, and in combination, it's the immune modulator to create a virus from the infection. So I don't think that we need to spend a lot of time on this. It's just give you a very comprehensive different developments and different mechanisms, because right now the limitation of oral antiviral therapy is they are all adding on the same targeted point, which is polymerase inhibitor. So here it shows you that it's actually different target point and life cycle of hepatitis B. So you see that in the phase 3 study, there is a 2 already. So probably in a year or 2, they can come to market. So I think with that, I thank you for your attention, and we can take some questions or comments.
Thank you, Dr. Pan. Great presentation as always. And again, I put a note in the chat, so if anyone has any questions, feel free to put those in the chat. We'll read those aloud. And also, if you'd like to come off mute and ask your questions to either Dr. Pan or Dr. Coffin, you can do that as well. Thank you. And for folks that just joined or joined during the presentation, Patrick, nice to see you or see your lovely photo as always. Happy to have you with us for this module 3. I have a couple questions that I will share, and hopefully we can get some more. So Dr. Pan, Dr. Coffin, how common is it that people can stop NA therapy?
So I can address that. It's actually relatively uncommon, especially in North America. The chance of achieving what we say the holy grail, surface antigen loss, is probably less than 5% after many, many years of being on antiviral therapy. So some people, they do, as per the guidelines, they do try to stop treatment if you've achieved e antigen loss and consolidation therapy. But there's some studies showing that there is a high risk of relapse even when you follow these guidelines. And similarly, if you stop in people that are e antigen negative after 3 years of viral suppression, there's a high risk of relapse. This is the reason why we're looking at using better biomarkers to see when we can stop therapy. And one in particular is quantitative surface antigen levels. And some studies have shown if the levels are less than 100, then the risk of relapse from stopping is lower. And that is sort of what's sort of being started to use in clinical practice is quantitative surface antigen levels. But the short answer is very rarely.
Yeah, I like to second to that. During my presentation, I mentioned that it should be different approach between the vertical transmitted population, i.e. the most Asian happy patients and non-Asian. Because actually the study done in Taiwan and population gastro many years ago, about 10 years ago, and they looked at a large cohort in Taiwan, vertical transmitted, and even e-antigen consolidated treatment become negative and continue to treat more than 2 years. After 5 years, more than 68% reverse. So that's not a good indicator. It's a midway indicator to stop the therapy. But also it's very challenging to develop the surface antigen loss or seroconversion at current antiviral therapy treatment. That's why I think that very few of them. However, in a selected subgroup of patients like Dr. Coffin mentioned, if you check for the surface antigen titer less than 15%, and then the current approach is suggest you to add on interferon for another year, you can approach 35% of surface antigen loss, even in Asian population. That might be the best way you can do, but not everybody putting an interferon. You could only get a better success in those with the surface antigen level below 1500. So another thing I want to point it out might be interesting to your practice is it really depends on where you practice. I know some international attendees. Now, I don't recommend that you follow AASLD guideline if you're in a resource limited area. In AASLD, when we discuss the guideline, we're based on the North America setting. So the more relevant to you, if you're practicing in Pakistan or somewhere, you look at the WHO guideline, might be more applicable. So there are different approach. Stopping the medication in Taiwan because the coverage for antiviral is very low. They forced to stop their patients after 2-year treatment if their viremia under control, regardless what. So I understand that if you practice in different area outside of the United States, you may have limitation. You don't always have to follow the US, the AASLD guideline. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with you in that we have to be practical and practice, work with what we have. I think the main thing is if you do stop is that you monitor the patient. So monitoring their ALT and HBV DNA just to see if there is a severe reactivation or flare that we recognize it and can restart treatment urgently.
Thank you both. Before I go over to Dr. Moy's comment in the chat or question in the chat, I have a question. What happens after interferon therapy? Do people need to go on NA or is interferon therapy ever repeated?
I can take that. I think, are you talking about, let me clarify that. Are you talking about patient relapse?
Yes.
Okay. Now, definitely, I think Eugene Ship, one of the hepatologists, we call it godfather of hepatologists in Miami, he did a very good study on relapse after interferon and showed that it's still equally effective if you put them on oral antiviral treatment. But we tend not to put patients on interferon again, because if they have relapse, that means the durability of interferon therapy in this case may not be good. So still put them back on if they relapse to the point that it's qualified for treatment indications. So that actually highlight the importance of monitoring patient. Dr. Coffin just mentioned. Even patients are doing well, understand no matter what you do now, it's not a curative therapy. Like Hep C, we don't monitor it unless the patient has fibrosis or worry about significant fibrosis, worry about cancer. But Hep B is different. They always have a chance to relapse because we don't have cure.
Thanks, Dr. Pan. And Dr. Moy asked, do we still screen for HCC in patients with hepatitis B without cirrhosis who has become hepatitis B surface antigen negative after treatment?
I can answer that. We had the same question, I believe, last session. I guess it was a different group. And we had said that in studies have shown in people that are younger, so under the age of 40 might be a good cutoff, who achieve surface antigen loss. And if they do not have cirrhosis, then the risk of developing hepatocellular carcinoma is considered to be very low. If they don't have any other conditions that could, any other liver conditions such as fatty liver disease or alcohol-related liver disease and so on.
Thanks, Dr. Coffin. Dr. Asefa asked a couple questions. First is in the chat, when do you consider combination therapy, and when to consider screening for HDV co/super infection?
So for the Delta, co, or super infection, the guidelines are evolving. EASL recommends that every surface antigen positive individual should have a one-time screening test for Delta. I believe ASLD is going to be moving towards the same recommendation, and we're going to do that as well in Canada. So considering combination therapy, do you mean with interferon or combination nucleoside analog? If you could. I can say for interferon, it's rarely to start de novo combination interferon plus a nucleoside analog and hepatitis B monoinfection. In hepatitis delta co-infection, you should consider it. For combination nucleoside analog, there's no strong data or recommendation to do that. But there was one interesting paper a few years ago published by Dr. Locke in Gastroenterology that showed that in patients with very high viral load, like greater than 10 to the 8, for example, combination of tenofovir and entecavir led to a more robust or more rapid viral suppression compared to monoinfection, but that is not considered to be routine or needed to do in clinical practice for most of our patients. So just single first-line nucleoside analog is okay.
Yeah, the new guideline, ASLD guideline, is going to come out next year, most likely in the first or second quarter. And the inside news I know is they're going to endorse the CDC screening guidelines. So it's not going to come up with different tones and different approach. They will endorse it. So most likely you need to screen at least one time for Delta. In clinical practice, we don't see a lot of advantage of doing combination treatment de novo. Because the current first-line antiviral therapy, they're very effective in dropping the viral already. You're talking about 85+% in 1 year, they can approach undetectable. So considering the cost and cost effectiveness, I think there is no compelling reason that you have to do a de novo and just try to drop initially that 1 log or 2 log viremia level. So I guess that's why there is no current guideline that I know of that recommend you to de novo combination of first-line treatment.
Great question. Great questions. Anyone else?
I have a question for Dr. Pan, and this is related to the interesting study showing residual risk of hepatocellular carcinoma with low level viremia. And the
Right.
study used less than 2,000. But what do you think, and I probably know what your answer is going to be, about those that have like very low level viremia, like less than 100, or even if those that have little blips in their DNA, like detectable, undetectable, and should we be more concerned about these patients developing HCC compared to those that is always undetectable?
Let me try to understand your question better. You're talking about the primary prevention, right? It's not like patient have HCC already.
No, yes, that's right. So people that are on the
So
nucleoside analog, the viral load is suppressed, but sometimes it blips up,
yeah,
or it's not quite undetectable. It's less than 100.
right. And actually, I got a very fresh memory because before this meeting, I was in the China meeting from 9 p.m. to 11, and actually talking about this. They visit the data on the Korean data and looking at the suboptimal response to antiviral therapy and long-term impact of HCC. I think what that data didn't show, but it's very likely, but they didn't show is in non-cirrhotic patients. They did not show the HCC difference, but what they saw is in a cirrhosis population, and definitely will show the HCC is much higher than those patients have complete control of viremia. So based on their data, the current practice, I think, should follow the data is try to control those patients with low level of viremia. But how low is low? Preferably less than 20, and do your best. That's, I think, how I interpret the data. Do you have any different thoughts or different things that you would do in your practice?
Yeah, I know. I agree with you, but I've looked at that, sometimes looked at my patients and thinking, is there any advantage to adding on tenofovir and entecavir together to get them, even lower? And I don't really see any strong evidence that you need to do that in patients that are non-cirrhotic.
Well, I don't have a great data, but actually I'm leading a multi-center study in China, and we have enrolled 109 patients with suboptimal response. We check all the mutations. There is no antiviral resistant. Patients have been compliant at least for 6 months. They have been on first-line treatment. So we are still following those patients. I think the result will come out at the end of the year. We just switched them to TAF. Most of them actually are entecavir, the novel treatment. They don't have resistance. So we'll see what the data will show up. But I agree with you. Probably you don't need a combination treatment, but just a switch to either TAF or TDF if the patient doesn't have the risk for the side effect for TDF. But we are all switching patients to TAF and see how quicker they suppress them to undetectable. So the result should be available in next AASLD. I think another interesting phenomenon is why we have patients at suboptimal. So it has been shown that not a lot of study, at least 5 or 6, and patients have fatty liver disease, NASH. They may hindering the antiviral therapy to clear the virus. So I'm just curious in the future if we can work together in some patients if they have fatty liver disease or NASH with all those very robust metabolic treatments, GLP-1, and with that would help, improve the NASH or NAFLD. That would actually enhance the clearance of virus. That still need to be studied, but very interesting.
All right, a couple comments or questions in the chat. How common is NA resistance? How will we treat those patients with resistance? Specifically TDF.
How often they have resistance for TDF and TAF? We don't have a great evidence showing that you could develop resistance to those two drugs. For entecavir, that novel therapy, that means patients having been treated by any antiviral, you start with entecavir, they should get less than 1% of those patients may develop resistance. But if they have been on second line, particularly a nucleoside, lamivudine or talpiridine, they develop resistant. 50% of entecavir treatment on those patients would develop resistance eventually. So in one slide, I mentioned that any possible resistance you suspect, then you probably, the safe side is put them on TAF. And if they don't have risk for renal bone and TDF is my second favorite, but both of them should be able to handle the resistant issues. That may answer how we should treat the resistant.
All right. It seems like there was a part 2 to that. Do we have to treat patients with isolated antibody hepatitis B core antigen? If yes, how are we going to follow them and what is the goal?
I can answer that. I think this is, if you refer to module 1, we cover this, which is a great question. So for isolated anti-core, our recommendation is that we should, if we don't know what their hepatitis B vaccine status is, it's important that they get vaccinated for hepatitis B as per the CDC guidelines. But most of these individuals that are anti-core and or anti-surface positive, we don't need to worry about them. We don't need to follow them. The only concern is with possible immunosuppression and risk of reactivation. So these are people that have been exposed to hepatitis B in the past and cleared. And because you don't get rid of all the virus inside the liver, there's still risk of reactivation with very potent immunosuppression, such as B cell depleting therapies like rituximab or bone marrow transplantation or chemotherapy. So these situations is when you need to worry and follow and treat. But otherwise, the normal immunocompetent adult, you don't need to worry or do any special follow-up unless they have cirrhosis. So that's a different as well. Again, that's sort of covered in module 1. Patients that have cirrhosis need to be followed.
I would provide you a little bit more deeper discussion for isolated core patients, whether they receive vaccine. For the CDC old guideline, that means, last year, if you look at that guideline, exactly like Dr. Coffin suggests, you probably should consider to give the vaccination for isolated core patient. And that recommendation is still there. But if you look at the new guideline just last month, about a month ago in March, they updated their guideline, they changed their tone. So you may want to consider to change your practice a little bit. What they would recommend is based on some recent study, and they try to balance out two things. One is if you vaccinate those patients, and number one is some reason that suggests that your vaccination is not going to be successful. Number two is if the patient had been exposed to hepatitis B and actually their core positive is represent that the past exposure and exclude their need for vaccination. So if you compare two guidelines, I actually change the tone a little bit. It's still same like Dr. Coffin suggests, you should consider some patients should give them. Before they routinely recommend to give a shot, and try to cover those patients false positive. Now they change their tone. They say that you only consider to give vaccination for those patients would not have any history to get exposed to. that means, they're clear turkeys, they don't have family members, they have happy, or they have none of the risk factors. So only vaccinate those patients without risk factor of exposing to hepatitis B. So that's what they would suggest. And I think even among all the experts are still debating what you would do. So try to do the best for your patient and see what makes sense. It's not assess those things.
Thanks, Dr. Pan. I think this will be the last two questions before we move on to that case. Hepatitis B surface antigen clearance in patients receiving PEG interferon sometimes takes longer. If by the end of 24-week treatment is still high, will adding an NA benefit or not?
This one is like talking about the on-treatment predictors, right? So if I understand your question correctly, that means you have a patient on interferon.
Yeah, I think they're using the quantitative surface antigen as their predictors for response
for
to interferon.
for whether adding or not, or for using a combination or not. I don't think there is a great answer of so-called add-on oral treatment. Now, what we saw on the data, that's the Gilead study, the 174 study, which they compare monotherapy interferon versus in combination, de novo in combination with interferon with TDF, and they showed that the combination actually have a better chance to get the serological outcomes, whatever you want to define, e-antigen and surface antigen, versus oral monotherapy or interferon monotherapy. But it looks like here is an add-on 24 weeks. I don't know any data actually doing a 24 weeks assessment and add-on. In the early interferon study, their phase 3 study, they did look at the 3 months, 12 weeks viremia reduction actually can predict the outcome of at the end of the treatment. There might be some patient not worth it to go beyond after you find 3 months treatment that their viremia is not dropped more than 2 logs. So I don't have the answer for that, whether we should. I think we need a study. We need some study in looking at the surface antigen clearance. If at the end of the 24 weeks not clear, then you add on oral treatment. Chances are surface antigen clearance will not happen that often until 1 year treatment. The 1 year treatment, surface antigen loss in the pivotal trial, calculated interferon, the Roser study, is less than 10%. I think if I remember, it's like 8 or 9%. Then they follow up for 4 years, and then they can reach up from 60 to 20% somewhere. So even surface antigen clearance is not that great in calculated interferon, because there's 6 to 8% range. That's why people would argue, I mean, in America, they argue, if I provide oral antiviral treatment for 5 years and I can get rid of those side effects, it's equal to your 1 year treatment of interferon. You just like 1 or 2% higher. So it's not worth it to ask your patient to go through interferon injection. I can do it for 5 years. I think that was the argument. But could you be able to use a 24 weeks surface antigen clearance, surface antigen level, to predict whether you should add on or not? Then I don't know the answer. But even you add on, their surface antigen clearance at the end of 1 year treatment is not that great anyway. From the Gilead study, that they know treatment combination already. So they do like the whole year oral antiviral combination, not like the last 6 months that what you are proposed here.
Thanks, Dr. Pan. And our last question, Shantae asked, just for clarification, immunocompromise includes transplant as well for possible reactivation?
Yes. Yes, solid organ transplant.
Yeah, any solid organ transplant, suppressive therapy.
Right. Thank you both. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Really great questions, thoughtful questions. Keep them coming, and we'll answer even more next week for our final. Actually, I think are we meeting next week or skipping? I'll have to double check. But we'll move over to that case. So I will share my screen. Dr. Pan, will you be going through this, or Dr. Coffin?
Sure. Yeah. Put on the screen. I'll
Yep.
read the question. So you have case 3, 27-year-old patient was found out happy, just doing a routine exam about a week ago, and then now he come to your office. Maybe a physical exam was next door. He would deny the guy there. Then, oh, he said, doctor, you are the best. So you want a second opinion. You ask for the blood test. That's what he brought in. Surface antigen positive, E negative patients with very low viral, 24,000, just over the indication threshold for treatment. Then ALT have been normal. Let's give you more numbers. And his ALT is like 20, and his albumin is totally normal. So it's not like compensated or anything. And how would you manage him if his father or brother with liver cancer? I want you to think about if they have the family history or he hasn't any family history, would you do it differently? And what's more important, these patients might have some renal issues, proteinuria, but creatinine is normal, so it's not the bad candidate yet. This is actually can help you to make some good choice on antiviral treatment. If the patient is ALT elevated to 180, and AST is mild, moderately elevated, and would you approach differently? So basically, this question is asking you what kind of patients you would treat, and if you decided to treat the patient, what medication is the best regimen for this patient.
Thanks, Dr. Pan.
I guess another side question would be, would you monitor this patient for liver cancer that we discussed on the slide?
One of our learners said for question 1, they would say no. He would not need antiviral treatment.
Any different opinion? Or you would just agree with no treatment? Would you screen this patient for HCC if you don't want to treat at this point? Let's move you to the next question 2. Would you screen if you don't treat? Because his father and brother have liver cancer, but he's still young, he's 27.
Yep. Dr. Pan, we're getting, excuse me, some responses in the chat if you want to take a look at that. So Shantae said, treat with TDF or TAF, ultrasound, discuss if he's drinking.
Right. I agree with all those management strategies. I think if patients have significant viral, remember in module 2, we talk about viremia. Actually, it's a post-test question. Viremia is the most important factor to determine the treatment indication. So you have 2,000 already. Now, if you have ALT elevation, that might be a perfect case, right? You got viremia, you got indicator for liver damage. But even without normal ALT, giving the second question is if you know the patient had family history of cancer, particularly first degree relative, even ALT might indicate a better chance of progression to cirrhosis, but ALT doesn't give you an idea how high risk this patient may develop liver cancer. So family history did tell you the patient may have predisposition and higher chance to get liver cancer. So therefore, for the indication of reduced complication of liver cancer with a viremia 2000, definitely should get treatment. I agree with most of you that put in the treatment, antiviral therapy. I think in this case, because the treatment naive, any first line theoretically would work. It's only the side effect profile. They all pretty much equal efficacy. There have been a first line compared to second line and showing first line have better efficacy and reduce viremia. For example, entecavir compared to namivudine, TDF compared to adafovir, they all have been had that comparison. So there is no doubt to drop the viral load, reduce the liver cancer risk, first line is way to go. So either you cannot put three first line together, right? Patient have to pick one, unfortunately. So which one you pick actually is based on the safety profile. So let's move on the second question and the third. Well, the second we answer, we need to screen. And the third, based on this comorbidity or the other health condition, among the three first line treatment, which one you would pick? Is it TDF still your best choice? Do you have a concern about TAF? Or you totally shy away from TDF, TAF, and just move to entecavir?
Yeah, one of our learners said TAF seems like the only option and check more for kidney and calcium.
But somebody said that we can still use TDF.
Mm-hmm.
I want to hear your thought. Why TDF? You want to use TDF? Can you tell us why?
I think they were just looking at just question one
Oh,
and sort of going under the condition if you have renal disease.
right.
Yeah, but if you have renal disease, I think the group agrees that the two choices are either entecavir if you're treatment naive or TAF because of the side effects. Somebody also brought up an interesting point that we should check for extrahepatic. So this could be HBV related GN disease. So that's a very good point. We should consider this. Yes.
Right.
In which case, antiviral therapy is also beneficial.
Yeah. So if that's not, it's from the Hep B complication. So I would agree. I mean, any antiviral might improve this. That's definitely a possibility. So in other words, if you have no resource to do further work about this kidney issue, I would go with the safe approach and just start TAF or entecavir. But if you have the luxury to get into a little bit more detail and you still want to use your favorite drug of TDF, I have no problem with that. I think we need to figure out what this kidney issue is. But I think more convenient approach, I would agree with most of you. Just put them on entecavir, it doesn't hurt, or put them on TAF. And we can have time to figure out whether this urine proteinuria was actually from the Hep B or patient of comorbidities.
Yeah, I think they said that if the renal function is normal, you could use a TDF and say, yes, we agree once we figure out that the urine protein is not related to renal disease.
So the last question is, what if this patient have elevated ALT? like 3 to 4 times elevation of ALT above the upper limit of normal, giving a value of 2400, would you treat or not? Let's say the patient have no family history of cancer. Question 2 is delete. Just based on the ALT, viral low, would you tell this 27-year-old get treated?
Dr. Moy said yes, he needs to be
Yeah,
treated.
yeah, I agree with Dr. Moy. So let's just twist it a little bit, because this case didn't get you the chance to exercise your knowledge or learning point on resistant. So namivudine, what if this patients have been on namivudine? This one come from Cambodia, and in his country, he had no other first-line treatment. You can get namivudine because the namivudine actually is part of HIV treatment. You can easily get the acetylnamivudine. However, now the viral low, when this patient came to you, the viral is 2400. But he did not come back to you. He's still taking his namivudine he bought it from Cambodia. 6 months later, it popped up and it looks a little bit jaundiced. He said, look, I don't think the medication is working. So you test the viral low. He is taking it every day, but the viral low is like 6 million. And what do you think what happened to him? He's compliant with the medication.
Any thoughts, last thoughts from the group? We're a little over time, so I just want to take a minute or so just for our post-test and put that evaluation link in the chat. Any final thoughts on this case, anyone?
So I will just open the answer to you guys. I think these patients would have developed namivudine resistant. Namivudine is the most high frequency developed resistant. 1 year namivudine with treatment with namivudine, you have 1/3 of those patients develop resistant already. If in 3 years, you're probably approaching to 50 to 60% resistant. So namivudine is the worst drug to develop antiviral resistant, high frequency. And second is talpividine. It's about 7% or 8% per year. Entecavir is very lower chance, 1%. And TDF-TAF have zero resistance.
Thanks, Dr. Pan. All right, we've launched our poll, our post-test poll. The first one is a confidence question, so take your time to answer that. And then Dr. Pan, would you just clarify that question 2 again, as you did so eloquently in the pre-test, just to make it a little more clear?
Yeah, I think question 2 is asking you which of the following therapy has the highest rate of developing drug resistance, not high rate of barrier to the drug resistance. That means which drug is the worst in terms of developing resistance. They're easily develop drug resistant.
Yep. And you did just call that out a couple minutes ago. So give everyone just another couple moments to answer. And my colleague Jill put the link to the evaluation in the chat. Just make sure you're logged into your DKB Med account to do that. And we do encourage you to use the Chrome browser. That seems to work the best for most folks. And we will be meeting for our final module, Module 4, next week at the same time. So Tuesday at 12 Eastern. All right, so let's take a look at your responses. Seems like we're more confident, which is a great thing. And most of you said lamivudine. What's the correct answer, Dr. Pan?
Yeah, the correct answer is namivudine. So I think, next time I would I would let Dr. Coffin to to present the case. Maybe my voice is not attractive enough. Yes, we're still missing about 30% of attendees couldn't get what we discussed, what I discussed in the last couple of minutes.
No problem.
And no worries. We will, there's going to be a survey that we send all of our learners, just to measure, your confidence, really 30 days post activity, and you'll see some of these questions again. So we know you'll get 100% then. Okay.
Yeah, it's a very tricky question. So
yeah, it's not an easy one. For sure. Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate you joining us today. Apologies, we ran a little over, but we had so many great questions and feedback. So as always, really appreciate it. Echo clap. We will see you next time, and please be on the lookout for an email with a link to the slides, as well as a link to the evaluation. Thanks so much, everyone. Take care. Thank you, Dr. Pan. Thank you, Dr. Coffin. Bye, Dr.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.